I'm Diane Keller. I used to teach English at a public high school in Vermont. Back when blackboards were still common, and kids passed notes instead of phones. I've been retired now for almost a decade. Living alone in the same lakefront house where my husband and I raised our son and built a quiet life. I never thought I'd share something like this out loud. I'm not one for drama. And I've always believed in keeping the peace. Even when things hurt more than they should. But sometimes the peace you keep turns into silence. And the silence starts to eat away at your sense of self. This story isn't about revenge. Not in the shouting, door-slamming kind of way. It's about finding your voice again when you've let it go quiet for too long. And it's about choosing yourself. Not because you're angry, but because you finally understand that your worth was never supposed to depend on someone else's approval. So if you've ever felt dismissed or overlooked, if you've ever sat in a room full of people and wondered when you disappeared, then I hope you'll stay with me. What happened didn't break me. It woke me up. And sometimes that's all we need, a moment that shifts the light. Just enough to see ourselves clearly again. The lake has always been part of my life. When Jack and I bought this house 40 years ago, it was just a small, weathered cabin with uneven floors and a leaky roof. But we fixed it together. One season at a time. And somewhere along the way it became home, in the truest sense. After Jack passed, I kept most things the same. His boots still sit by the back door. And the kitchen clock, he insisted on winding every Sunday, still ticks. Even if it runs a little slow now. The quiet here is deep. Not empty exactly, but wide and constant. Like the lake itself in the middle of winter. I've always found comfort in routine. Morning tea on the porch. Folding laundry while the local radio hums in the background. Tending the garden out front. Even if the rabbits eat more of it than I do. There's peace in the slowness. In knowing what comes next. There are photos on the hallway wall that mark our years. Jack with his fishing pole. Eric on his 3rd birthday covered in frosting. Me holding a basket of wildflowers by the dock. I dust them every week. Not because they need it, but because I still like the feeling of my hands being useful. Eric doesn't come by much. He says work keeps him busy. And I believe that. Though I've stopped expecting the calls. Monica is polite. Always has been. But there's a distance in her that never quite lifts. It's not unkind. Just cool. Like a well-decorated guest room you're never really invited to sit in. Sometimes the silence feels like company. Other times it presses in. Reminding me how much space one life can take up when no one else fills it. Still, I've made peace with solitude. Or at least I thought I had. Until the dinner. Until the part where everything I trusted began to unravel without a sound. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail. Assuming it was the pharmacy or someone from the church committee. But something made me answer. And when I heard Eric's voice, smooth and unusually light, I stood still in the middle of my kitchen holding the dish towel like it was an anchor. He said they wanted to take me out to dinner. Not just a bite to eat, but a proper evening fancy place. White tablecloths. A reservation already set. I asked if there was a special occasion. And he chuckled softly. Said no. Just thought it'd be nice. Just the 3 of us. I told him yes. Almost before I knew why. Maybe it was the way his voice held a kindness I hadn't heard in a while. Or maybe it was the stretch of cold days that had settled into my bones and made the silence in the house feel sharper than usual. Either way, I hung up with a strange flutter in my chest. Something like hope wrapped in caution. That afternoon, I pulled out my nicest sweater and ironed a scarf Jack had given me one Christmas. I dabbed on a bit of powder, smoothed down my hair, and even reached for the good perfume I hadn't worn in years. I stood in front of the mirror a little longer than usual, half wondering if I was overdoing it, half afraid I wasn't doing enough. Eric pulled up right on time, dressed in a navy coat I didn't recognize. Monica stepped out from the passenger side, smiling like we hadn't just gone months without a real conversation. She helped me with my coat and complimented my scarf in that practiced tone of hers, warm enough to feel polite, but cool enough that I still noticed the distance. The restaurant was beautiful. Golden lighting, linen napkins, soft jazz playing just low enough to make you lean in to hear one another. Eric held the door. Monica placed a hand lightly on my back. And for a few moments, I let myself believe this was just a nice gesture. Maybe they missed me. Maybe this was one of those turning points I'd read about in magazines or heard about at church, the kind where children grow up and suddenly see you, not just as the one who raised them, but as a person again. But even as I smiled and took my seat, something didn't sit right. Eric was too smooth, too rehearsed. Monica's kindness felt structured, like it had been practiced. And though I wanted so badly to relax into it, to believe this was real, a quiet part of me stayed alert. The part that had learned, over many winters, that warmth can sometimes be the first sign of a coming storm. The wine had barely settled in my glass when Eric reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. He placed it gently on the table, just to the left of my plate, like it was part of the meal. His voice stayed calm, easy, almost cheerful, as he said they'd been talking to a few professionals and wanted to get ahead of some things before winter set in. I didn't touch it. My hand stayed folded in my lap. But my heart gave a strange twist that I tried to quiet. Monica leaned forward, her tone light and measured, saying things about simplifying ownership, streamlining responsibilities. Nothing too urgent. Just practical steps for the future? Eric added that I'd still live there. Of course, nothing would really change. It was just legal housekeeping. Monica smiled as she said that word. Housekeeping. As if the land and history and home I'd built with Jack were clutter to be tidied up. I looked down at the folder. My name was typed in clean bold letters across the front. A tab poked out neatly from the side. I could smell the paper. I could feel the silence between us stretch a little tighter. Eric spoke again. This time, with a soft sincerity that made my skin crawl. He talked about tax benefits, easier inheritance, legacy planning. The words were smooth and practiced. The kind you hear in commercials or from men in suits who never look you in the eye for long. Monica nodded along, filling in the gaps. She said her friend from the city ran a retreat business and thought the lake would be a beautiful setting for weddings and workshops. She spoke like it was already decided. Like I was just the final step in a process they'd started long before dinner. My fork rested against my plate, untouched. The lamb had gone cold. I glanced at the silver candlesticks flickering on the table, the polished wine glasses, the way Monica's spoon tapped gently against her dessert cup like nothing was happening. But everything was happening. My pulse thudded slow and heavy. I felt it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the stillness that took hold of me like a hand on my shoulder. I asked what the rush was. Eric laughed softly, said there wasn't one. But the way he leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes not quite meeting mine, told a different story. Monica mentioned something vague about the town looking into rezoning lakeside properties. Just a whisper of a change, she said. Nothing confirmed. But it would be wise to act before things got complicated. Her voice remained calm, her face smooth. But her words felt like pins pressing into fabric. I opened the folder slowly. The top page listed the parcel number, coordinates, and a highlighted clause that made my stomach knot. Transfer of ownership in full. I could still reside on the property, but any development, decisions, or financial rights would fall to Eric. There was a blank signature line waiting at the bottom. Just one line. Just one name. Mine. I closed the folder without a word. Monica kept talking. Eric smiled tightly. Neither of them seemed to notice I hadn't spoken for several minutes. I told them I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. Monica's face didn't shift. She touched my wrist gently and said we could talk again later. Eric stood, pulled out my chair, and said he'd take care of the bill. Outside, the wind cut through the evening air and slipped down the collar of my coat like it had been waiting. The sky had turned dark, the kind of heavy blue that feels close to black. In the car, "No one spoke?" Eric asked. Just before we pulled into my driveway. If I'd think about it, his voice was low, almost kind, like he was offering help instead of taking something. I nodded. Not out of agreement, but to end the moment. Inside, I set the folder down on the kitchen table, untouched since. I didn't open it again. I just stared at it, feeling the walls of my home shift around me. It was never a dinner. It was a transaction. And I was the asset on the table. It was a few days after the dinner when I noticed the empty space on the wall. The hallway near the kitchen had always held a line of old family photos, each one in a wooden frame Jack had built himself. I paused while dusting, staring at the gap where a picture of me and Eric used to hang, the one where I'm kneeling by the lake, holding wildflowers. And he's grinning with his hands full of muddy stones. At first I thought maybe it had fallen. I checked the floor, then the hallway drawer where I kept spare nails and loose hooks. It wasn't there. I searched the bookshelf, the coat closet, even the space behind the old calendar. Nothing. It hadn't slipped or been misplaced. It was gone. A few days later, I stopped by Eric's house to drop off a box of kitchen tins he used to love as a boy. It wasn't planned. I'd wrapped them in a towel and told myself it was just a kind gesture before the holidays. Monica answered the door, all smiles and practiced cheer, and ushered me into the entryway without offering a coat hook or asking how I was. I stood there a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the brightness of their space, all clean lines and scented candles. On the main wall, I saw it. A new family collage. Freshly framed. Glossy photos of birthdays, lake trips, backyard cookouts. Perfectly arranged. Eric was in nearly all of them. Monica too. The kids beamed in every frame. I stepped closer. Heart steady but heavy. My face wasn't in a single one. Not even in the corner. It was as if I'd never been part of any of it. Monica walked past behind me and said they had printed the whole thing last week. A surprise gift. Her voice was light, almost casual. There was no apology in it. No recognition. I placed the tin box down gently on their hallway table and let the silence hold everything I couldn't say. On the way home, I kept seeing that empty space on my wall. Not just a missing photo. A missing place. A key at removal. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about memory. About being edited out without anyone needing to say a word. I had just come in from sweeping the porch when I heard her voice. The kitchen window was open an inch to let the morning air in, and the wind carried the sound right through like it knew I needed to hear it. Monica was outside, pacing along the gravel path between my property and the hedgerow that marked the neighbor's line. At first I didn't realize she was talking about me. Her tone was clipped, efficient. Nothing like the careful sweetness she used at dinner. She spoke about permits, investor calls, early-stage branding. I heard the words luxury retreat and donor language, and seasonal wellness programming. Said so smoothly it was clear she'd practiced them before. Then she said the name, Keller Lake. It came out sharp, like a bullet hidden in a bouquet. She said it was perfect. Tucked away, but photogenic. With built-in nostalgia, and a local woman they could highlight for legacy storytelling. She said the old files would help sell the pitch to grant funders, My name would give it depth. That's how she phrased it. Give it depth? I stood frozen in place, still holding the broom. She had no idea I was home. Or maybe she didn't care. Either way, she kept going, her voice rising just enough to carry. She talked about soft launch plans, gathering testimonials, even using my old retreat records for emotional weight. She said once the deed was transferred, the campaign would begin in full. The only holdup was the last signature. Mine. It hit me like a slow wave. Not fast enough to knock me down, but deep enough to chill. This wasn't about family. It never had been. The dinner, the compliments, even the missing photo, it had all been staging. A soft lead into something they thought I would sign without question. I sat down at the kitchen table, hands still around the handle of the broom, and let the silence settle. My heart didn't race. My face didn't flush. What I felt wasn't panic or anger. It was something colder, steadier. The feeling of being wide awake. They thought I was just sentimental. Easy. A woman too old to push back. But they forgot who built this home. Who ran those retreats? Who kept every tax receipt? Every newsletter? Every handwritten thank you from girls who'd once sat by the fire and learned to believe in themselves. I was never just the past. I was the foundation. And now I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not scream. Not beg. Just remember. And prepare. That night I opened the linen closet and pulled out the old file box Jack used to keep tucked behind the spare towels. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Like so many things we kept too long but couldn't bear to part with. Inside were folders in his handwriting, carefully labeled, edges worn from time and memory. I sat at the dining table under the old brass light fixture and began sorting through the pieces of our life. There was the original deed to the property, signed in Jack's firm script, and a short note he'd written on the back of a utility bill. It said, "This land is for Diane. Let it serve." I read that line twice, then folded it slowly and placed it to the side like a promise. In the morning, I called Mark Easley, the lawyer who'd helped us draft our will years ago. He was retired now, living in a smaller town north of here. But his voice was still calm, still precise. He remembered me without hesitation. And when I explained everything, he didn't act surprised. Just asked quiet questions and listened all the way through. He told me the deed was strong. I held full custodial rights. But if I wanted to make sure the land couldn't be sold or reshaped against its purpose, there were protections I could put in place. He suggested creating a charitable trust. If I transferred the land into a nonprofit foundation with a clear mission and oversight board, it would no longer be mine alone. It would belong to something bigger. Something permanent. I hung up and sat in silence. Not because I was unsure, but because I felt something shift. I wasn't going to fight them by trying to win their approval or beg for space at their table. I was going to build my own. I pulled out an old address book from the side drawer and flipped through the pages. Some of the ink had faded, but the names were still there. Gloria, who used to run the reading circle with me. Beth, who taught financial literacy to single mothers. Sandra, who baked pies for every fundraiser and still sent Christmas cards with glittery snow. By late afternoon, I had called all three. None of them asked why I was reaching out. They just said, "Tell us when." We met that weekend at my house. The heater clicked in the corner and the kettle whistled while we spread old notebooks across the table. Each of them brought something: minutes from past meetings, flyers from long-forgotten retreats, a stack of thank you cards tied with ribbon. We talked for hours, not just about the land, but about what it had meant, what it could still become. I told them I wanted to create something lasting, a place for women like us, women who'd spent their lives caring for others, giving without asking. waiting to be seen. We called it the Keller Lake Women's Foundation. Its mission would be simple and clear: to offer seasonal retreats, skill-sharing circles, financial counseling, and quiet space for healing. A place for second chances. Not because we'd failed, but because we were never truly given a first one. That night, I sat with the paperwork in front of me. The legal language was dense, but I read every word. I initialed each page slowly, carefully, letting the weight of what I was doing settle into my bones. When I signed my name at the bottom, I didn't feel small. I felt rooted. I wasn't giving my land away. I was giving it back to the spirit that built it. To the women who made it more than soil and wood. To the version of me I had nearly forgotten. This wasn't about stopping Monica. It wasn't about punishing Eric. It was about drawing a new map. One where I wasn't just someone's mother or widow or signature. I was the center, the keeper, the voice. And now, that voice had work to do. It was a Thursday afternoon when their car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as the tires crunched over frost and gravel. Slow and deliberate, Monica stepped out first. Wearing a crimson coat trimmed in faux fur and holding a sleek leather binder pressed tight against her chest. Eric followed behind her, hands shoved into his coat pockets, like a boy who wasn't sure what apology looked like. They rang the bell. Waited. I didn't rush to answer. I folded the dish towel I had been holding, placed it neatly on the counter, and took one deep breath before walking to the door. They came in smiling too wide. Monica offered me a compliment about the smell of lentils on the stove, while Eric glanced around like he didn't remember what this house used to feel like. I led them to the living room where the sunlight streamed in through the window, catching specks of dust mid-air. They sat on the couch, Monica upright with perfect posture. Eric slouched beside her, eyes bouncing from rug to bookshelf. She opened the binder with a practiced rhythm, spreading out papers, charts, and bullet points. She spoke about investor interest, about zoning approvals, about the beauty of lakefront conversion. Her voice filled the room, smooth and confident. But not once did she say the word family. Not once did she say home. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. When she pointed to the final page, labeled Property Owner Approval, I reached down beside my chair and picked up a single sheet from a manila envelope. I handed it to Monica and watched her eyes scan the top line. Then she blinked. Once. Twice. Slower than usual. The document was from my lawyer. It confirmed that the lake property had already been transferred into a charitable trust. The Keller Lake Women's Foundation now held full ownership. The foundation did not intend to sell. Eric leaned forward, voice unsteady. He asked why I hadn't told them. I looked at him and said, the only thing I needed to. Because I did. That night. And you made it clear what you wanted had nothing to do with me. Monica's jaw clenched. But she said nothing. She closed her binder too quickly, her hands tight on the spine. They stood in silence. Eric looked at the floor. Monica didn't meet my eyes. They left without a word. I stood at the door. Not to watch them go, but to make sure it was done. I picked up the packet Monica had left on the coffee table. I took it to the fireplace, opened the cover, and fed the pages one by one into the flames. They curled fast, edges blackening and folding inward like petals pulled in reverse. Outside, the trees swayed in the wind, branches bare and open. Inside, for the first time in months, I felt no ache in my chest, just stillness, and a quiet, steady peace. The morning of the launch was quiet, with a soft mist draped over the lake like a curtain waiting to be drawn back. Folding chairs had been set up in rows beneath the tall sycamore trees, their bare branches reaching gently overhead. The grass was cool beneath our feet, but there was warmth in the air from the way people greeted each other. They came in coats and scarves, carrying crockpots and baskets of muffins wrapped in kitchen towels. Women I hadn't seen in years smiled as they hugged one another, voices low and full of recognition. These were not donors or sponsors or press. They were neighbors, friends, survivors. At and sharp, I stepped onto the small wooden platform facing the lake. My notes were folded in my coat pocket. But I didn't need them. I looked out at the circle of faces and let the stillness settle. Then I told them the truth. I said I had spent years waiting to be understood by people who never planned to listen. I said the lake had always been a place for quiet things to grow. And that now, maybe for the first time, it would grow something meant to last. I told them this wasn't just a foundation. It was a space to return to ourselves. For every woman who had been overlooked, passed by, or made to feel like her story didn't matter. We would gather here not for show, but for real things. Learning, healing, speaking, resting. When I finished, no one clapped right away. The moment just sat there between us, soft and full. Then the applause came. Not loud, but steady, like a breath let out after being held too long. Afterward, we shared soup and cornbread at long wooden tables. Someone had brought old retreat photos. Someone else offered a song on guitar. The wind picked up slightly and rippled the lake. I stood beside the water and felt a sense of belonging I hadn't known in years. Not because I was needed, but because I had chosen this, and it had chosen me back. The house has been quieter than usual, but it feels different now. Not hollow or heavy, just still in a way that lets the light in. I sit with my tea each morning by the window, wrapped in Jack's old green shawl, and let the warmth settle across my shoulders. On the table beside me is a small mirror I found tucked away in a drawer. I keep it there not to check for lines or gray hairs, but to remind myself to look. I spent too many years waiting for someone else to say I mattered, hoping for a nod or a kind word that never quite came. Now, I look into that glass and see someone whole. Not perfect, not finished, but no longer hidden. I don't need their approval to claim what's always been mine. Some mornings I ask myself a key question. Not out loud, just inside. Did I show up for myself today? Not in a grand way, but in the ways that count. And lately, more often than not, the answer is yes. I used to think peace would come from being seen by the people I loved. But now I understand it starts by seeing yourself clearly, without apology. That kind of clarity doesn't shout. It simply stays. And for me, that's enough. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, or maybe something you're still carrying, I hope you'll take a moment to share it. You can leave a comment, pass the video along, or just sit with it for a while. Sometimes reclaiming your worth doesn't start with a big decision. It starts with a quiet one. Thank you for spending this time with me. Your story matters. Even if no one has said it lately, and you're not alone. Not even a little.